views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Middle schoolers are heading back to their classrooms in person in New York City. They've been learning from home since coronavirus cases spiked in mid November. Over the past year, we've all experienced a lot of uncertainty, but the youngest members of our society have perhaps been the most impacted. Welcome to Bronx Connections, The Digital Divide. I'm Eliot Schiaparelli.
And I'm Nora Thomas. We're reporters for WFUV, an NPR affiliate station based on the Rose Hill campus of Fordham University in the Bronx. Bronx Connections is a joint initiative between BronxNet TV, WFUV News, and Norwood News. This is the first episode in a new iteration of our show. This time, we're covering the new abnormal.
It's been almost a year since offices sent their employees home to participate in Zoom calls from the couch, schools shut down, and bars and restaurants closed their doors. Over the past year, things have reopened and closed again in a turbulent back and forth as the country struggles to balance helping the economy and maintaining public health. And it's something we've all experienced. So, how are people coping? What has the past year taught us about ourselves and one another? And Nora, what happens now?
Experts are increasingly sure the coronavirus, in one form or another, is here to stay. They expect its impacts to dissipate over time, but continue to circulate like a seasonal flu. Vaccines are giving us hope, but it could be fall before the majority of people have gotten the vaccine. Other effects of the virus are probably here to stay as well. When it's safe to return to offices in person, will people go back, or will some choose a work from home model? Will virtual events, game nights, and information sessions still be held online? Will we be wearing masks forever?
I hope not, but it seems likely. The last year has been a lesson in resiliency and creativity, and perhaps more than any other group, teachers have had to scramble to find creative solutions to navigate the new digital world. These pandemic precautions like masks, goggles, plexiglass dividers have to be really scary for little kids, but these teachers are working so hard to keep their students engaged. I saw one teacher go semi viral on TikTok because she decorated her students' plexiglass dividers so each desk looked like a little truck.
Oh, that's great. My stepmom says doing school over Zoom has made birthday celebrations a lot more fun. She has her students form little committees to plan the parties on Zoom. She says the chat feature of Zoom also has been really helpful in encouraging her shy students to share their thoughts.
Well, hopefully she can keep some of those things going even once they're back in the classroom. And that brings me to my next question. Is there anything we can learn from the past year? Things we did or experienced that could help improve education and open it up to more people? Could there be this silver lining to a pandemic that has taken the lives of millions of people?
I don't know, Elliot. One major push of both the previous Trump administration and now of the Biden administration is to get children back in school in person. Taking classes online is taking a toll on students and their teachers, socially, mentally, and emotionally, as well as academically. One study from the CDC measured mental health related emergency room visits and found that they sharply increased in March when lockdown started.
President Biden's plan to reopen schools across the country includes these same precautions and changes we've been talking about for a year now.
In some ways, New York City's been ahead of the curve. While many urban school districts started off the year fully online, New York City's public schools have been trying to do in person learning since late September, but it hasn't been smooth sailing. While 3K through fifth grade have mostly managed to stay in person, aside from a few weeks stretch toward the end of last year, middle and high schoolers haven't been in the classroom since November.
So, what has trying to juggle in person and back home and in person again been like for teachers?
I think it's been pretty hard. I sat down with Emily Paddon, a teacher at Kennedy's Children's Center in West Farms. She's been off and on virtual and in person since last summer. Paddon teaches young kids with developmental delays. She says it's been really hard to help them learn social skills like sharing. Obviously, it's been a very difficult year for everyone, but one of the most dramatic um, remote shifts with perhaps some of the largest repercussions has been in education. Can you tell us a bit about what it's been like shifting around so much?
It has been overwhelming, to say the least. I think that perhaps the worst part of it is not being able to plan far in advance. You can really only plan for the week ahead. And such a huge part of teaching is having kind of, like a grand scheme plan and a big direction of where you're going, but you don't even know like when the next time you're going to see your kids is. Like when this all started, we thought we were going to be gone for like just a couple weeks. And now it's been so much back and forth. And even every time we're remote, it's a different plan of how we're supposed to implement remote services. So it's just so much adapting. And as a person who likes to plan, that's what makes me feel better about things. It's hard not to be able to.
That makes sense. And from my understanding, you started the school year in July. What were you in person in July? What did that look like?
So we were remote for our summer program. So for our July-August program, we were totally remote. And then we started the September school year also remote. And then we went back to a hybrid model. So we split the students into two cohorts, A and B, and they would come in on alternate weeks. So we started that around the end of October, but around December, we had some positive cases in the school. We had to shut down a couple of classrooms, and then we made the decision to go remote through the Christmas break. And then we came back in person for hybrid again, and we're there 2 weeks, and we had to close again. So we're back to full remote. It's been a lot of up and down, back and forth.
I imagine the back and forth is difficult for all teachers. Are there any unique challenges working with such a young age group?
It is, I think the unique challenge is working with a young age group and then working with students on the spectrum where routine is so important. So I also have a lot of students where, this is their first year in school. So teaching that routine of being in the classroom has been such a challenge. And even just the every other week model is really hard because you teach those classroom skills, they're gone for a week and there's a lot of regression just that 1 week being home. So having a couple of months away from school is so difficult because you lose that routine. You can, give parents as many tips as you want on how to implement routine and structure at home, but it's a huge demand to put on parents, even if they are willing to do it. So I think that is a particular difficulty of the population I work with.
Since most parents do work and, it's difficult for a parent to both have a full-time job and sort of halfway be a teacher to their child, since that's how we're all sort of being forced to navigate. Do you feel like there's a lot of students who just aren't getting the educational experience that they need?
Absolutely. I think that, I see each of my kids for a 20-minute session every day. So I do, individual sessions with each student, but even still, like that's not what they should be getting. They should be in school for 5 hours. That's what their IEP mandates. But this is the most we can do. Like parents work, even just scheduling that 20-minute session during the day is so much work. It's at the same time every day, but calling parents to remind them, helping them to get on the Zoom call, it is a lot. And then having to tell them what supplies to use because you really need interactive activities with materials. And it's so much for them to manage. They have multiple kids home. A lot of them are working and some of them are single parents. It's just way too much. They're overwhelmed.
What are some ways that you have had to sort of try to incorporate like a social aspect into virtual school?
That is a great question. We've definitely had to get very creative. With one student in particular, I incorporate his siblings into the video chat. So one family, there's 3 siblings, very close in age, and the mom has told me that, this student has a lot of difficulty sharing with his siblings. They are fighting about things. He gets very upset when his siblings touch his stuff. So I've just kind of incorporated the siblings into the routine and we work on whatever activity we're going to do for that day. I ask mom to get out, a little portion of Play-Doh for each of them and we're all going to work on it, and the student will work on, coping with the fact that not all the Play-Doh is in his hands. And so just even incorporating the family is something to do, even practice taking turns like with the parent. It's still a step.
You mentioned that like some districts, which I feel like can be read as a statement about how funding and education often isn't distributed equitably. Do you think because there has been such a need to get devices out to families in communities that maybe aren't traditionally uh, affluent, do you think that it has in some ways created the potential for a more equitable access to technology across the board?
I hope that, I think that, in this pandemic and its effect on education, I think it has started a conversation about, equity and how it is disproportionately affecting poor communities. Um, I hope that that conversation doesn't end when we're back in person, because it's still relevant. The resources you have at home have a direct impact on, students' performance in the classroom. It's just the resources you have. And, clearly, we're able to rally funds and get resources to people when we feel it's an emergency. But honestly, it's always an emergency. Like, the achievement gap has always been there. And we can't just stop once we're back in person and we feel like the emergency's over. It's just that not everyone's been aware that it's always an emergency.
I guess switching gears a little, you're somewhat of a new teacher in because this has been such like a massive shift for everyone. Has it sort of made it easier in some ways for you to feel on equal footing with more experienced teachers because everyone's had to make giant adjustments?
Yes, I think in a sense, yeah. I think it's been a lot harder for older teachers. One, because, they're down to a routine. Like, they know what they do at each month of the year. When each unit comes, they know their activities that work. They are down to a routine. Also, technology is not always their thing. Not to make a generalization, but a lot of the older teachers and staff at my school have had a lot of trouble adapting to using technology. I consider myself very lucky that I'm relatively good with technology and have been able to kind of coach my staff through using it. But we are in like dire need of some really good, professional developments and instruction. In my schools, we're trying our best and starting to do that more, whether it's, instructions in Zoom or Google Slides or, different web platforms that you can use to have lessons with the students. But it's not the job that people signed up for.
That's fair. I guess, what do you envision for the rest of the school year? Do you think you'll get back in the classroom for a prolonged period of time, or do you think it'll keep sort of waffling?
I am hoping that there will be no back and forth. Because that has been a lot on teachers and families. I know that we'll be remote for the month of February. I hope that when we do make the decision to go back to hybrid, because I don't think we'll be back full in person, I hope that it is like a final choice. It has been decided. It is safe. Many of us have gotten the vaccine. We're ready. No more back and forth. It's too much.
Do you think looking forward to next school year, it'll be easier to have at least something more concrete?
I hope so. Yeah, I would like to say that I envision next year being at least not full remote. I think that's so hard to think about. I wonder, like, will there still be families who just are not comfortable sending their child? Because now we have, classrooms, we have more classrooms. We have more classes than we have classrooms because there are some full remote classrooms. I don't know what that means for next year.
Eliot, you spoke with some high schoolers. How's the past year gone for them?
Yeah, I really wanted to hear from the students themselves. So I spoke with a pair of siblings who have spent the past year distance learning from home through their New York City public schools, and they haven't been in a classroom since last March. Ilana Drake is a senior at the high school for math, science, and engineering, and she also sits on the Chancellor Student Advisory Council. Her brother Ari is a 10th grader at Columbia Secondary School. They both describe distance learning, but the challenges they each face are really different. So, can you each take me through a typical day at your schools? And can you also introduce yourself and give me your name, where you go to school, and the grade you're in?
Hi, I'm Ilana Drake. I am in 12th grade, so I'm a senior at the high school for math, science, and engineering. So during the pandemic, my classes are actually shorter. I have 38-minute classes, and sometimes it's a bit longer, but usually I'm only in school from 8 o'clock to 11 a.m. And usually I only have three classes or two classes a day that actually meet. But then my after school activities have been changed. So they're all online. I literally live a virtual life. But usually I'm only on the computer for less time than a lot of other students. So that's really great. I enjoy it.
What are some of those activities that you participate in after school, and how do you participate in them?
So after school, I'm involved in social justice, so activism and writing. Most of my activities have gone online this year, so through Zoom calls, and that's really great because I'm actually able to have that socialization aspect, as I'm not really getting that in my classes, since a lot of my classes don't really allow for that breakout room time or just time to get to know your classmates and know what everyone's going through. So most of them either meet on the weekends or after school. I'm also on the Chancellor Student Advisory Council, and that meets every Monday. So I'm involved with the New York City Department of Education as well.
And Ari, what about you?
Hi, I'm Ari Drake. I am a 10th grader in Columbia Secondary School. My regular day is an 8:20 to 2:20 with then after school activities after it. It did not change from pre-pandemic, but when it was in March, from March to June, it was much shorter because my school didn't know what they were doing with the response to the pandemic. And then in September, it became a regular standard day again, except Zoom was much longer. There are asynchronous days, sometimes once per each class, which is kind of nice, which means no doing Zoom, but you still have to complete a worksheet for that class by the end of class time. And um, say after school is pretty much the same as it was. It's just online. So
And have you guys been able to see friends you would ordinarily see at school at all, or have you pretty much been home for the past year?
I've seen one of my school friends over December break but I'm only seeing them when the rate isn't as bad as it is. Obviously, the rate was much better in the summer than it is now, so it would have been smarter to actually see more of my school friends in the summer, but it was still there was no vaccine in the summer, and that was what we were hoping on.
For me, it's a bit different. So I've seen a few friends, but very socially distanced, masks on at all times. Our grandparents, before they were vaccinated, we had to be extremely careful because even seeing a friend, the risk of that is really high. So I've been extremely careful.
And Ari, do you try to meet with your friends over Zoom? Do you plan game nights? Do you plan socialization that way?
Well, I think it's a bit harder because especially when you're in 10th and 11th grades, when you're doing a lot more work every night, there's not as much time to meet, especially online, because you have once you finish your day and after school activities, then you have to start your homework right away for the next day. So that can be kind of hard. And there's like every teacher gives a lot of homework depending, and it's all on the screen, so at some point you probably get tired of staring at the screen for about 12 hours 13 hours a day, and it can be kind of painful to keep looking. So in some ways I view it as better to um, stay away from the screen at night just to relax, because then the next day unless it's a weekend, then you're going right back on the screen again.
Would you say that's one of the biggest challenges of the virtual world and Zoom, or are there other things that we're not even thinking of that are a challenge for teenagers like you guys?
I would say that and the amount of stress that you can get from remote learning in total. Um, Starting with because when you're on Zoom for so much, it can hurt your eyes, especially when doctors say not to stare at screens for about more than like 2 hours or 1 hour a day, and we're staring at it just for not even for our own preferences, for our own classes, for that amount of time can be painful. Um, so I think that, and then also the stress that comes from remote learning, especially there's no transition times obviously now between classes because everything can be done on the computer in like half a minute. So you have the pressure of getting to class right away, and then also staying on top of your work because it's very tough with all after school. So you might, like, I start some of my work during my lunch period just so that in the night I can relax a bit more. So because of I don't want to keep I'd rather do my on paper work during the day to at least take a small break from my eyes.
For either of you, is there anything your teachers are doing to help with that? Do you have a particular teacher who's helping out really well, or something that you wish they were doing?
I wish that my teachers understood that not everyone can turn on their camera or not everyone should be able to turn on their camera at different points. I feel like this goes for after school activities too. As my brother mentioned, there's a lot of stress on our eyes, especially with the computer, and certain people learn better with certain ways. One thing that I wish my teachers were doing was holding office hours. I attend a specialized high school in New York City, which prides itself on the STEM courses and also our academics. Like I feel like that's like the base of our high school. But the issue is that this year we don't really have office hours. None of my teachers have reached out to students in the way that they may have when we were in person. And I also think with the amount of time on Zoom or even the amount of time with homework, um, even during the break, like we're on break right now, we were assigned a bunch of work. I have like a research paper due this Tuesday. So I think teachers understanding that there's more stress than they think put on students during the pandemic, especially if you're working in a small apartment.
Is that the feedback you've given the Department of Education?
I would say I definitely have given that feedback to the Department of Education. I'm on the Chancellor Student Advisory Council, so we've definitely discussed remote learning, but every school's approaching remote learning differently. So I would say that some schools are doing better jobs with it. Also thinking about mental health. That's super important during this time because we're all very isolated. So I know some of my friends have not actually seen other friends at all, even over Zoom. They really haven't had that interaction. And a lot of students are having second jobs or having to do roles that they never really had before, whether that be babysitting. Like one of my best friends is taking on another job as a babysitter during the pandemic, or even trying to figure out how to do school and work or school and extracurriculars. So I would say teachers understanding that the pandemic does not only have this mental stress on us, it also has other stresses too.
Do you feel heard on that advisory board?
I do feel heard. It's super cool because I'm one of the 7 representatives from Manhattan. So I get to actually discuss the issues and get to feel like I really have a voice in the Department of Education, which is extremely important. Although there are 1.1 million children and young adults in the New York City public school system, and I'm not sure if everyone really has a voice because there's so many of us, but there's also so many people that I feel like their voices are lost, especially if you aren't able to participate in extracurriculars during this time, or knowing that about, I think, 750,000 students are at or below the poverty level in New York City. Thinking about that and thinking about how COVID really exacerbates this and really widens the inequities.
And is there anything else you guys want to say that I haven't asked yet about virtual learning and about the past year?
I would say that this year, or the pandemic, honestly, the silver lining is knowing that certain students learn better than others online, and that online learning is beneficial for some students more so than others. So I think as a student with a learning disability, online learning has been better for me in some aspects, in terms of having less classes online or having shorter classes. I enjoy that because I get more freedom after school. So my classes end earlier. I feel like I'm on the computer much less than my brother, so it's the exact opposite. But just getting to really write and getting to do more activism outside, and just having that freedom in my day to actually take walks and have breaks, which I don't think many students can say. But also recognizing that it's harder with remote learning to take tests. I know my brother touched on this before with exams during online learning, but I would say it's a lot harder because when you take a test online, you have to be in a really quiet space. And I'm not sure that every student in the city has that space. I don't think most people do, based on what I've seen from my friends, but also people have very different roles due to the pandemic. So thinking about even that time it takes to take a test, but understanding that online learning definitely has its benefits. I think if a student is sick and we like are in person next year, online learning is a great way to go because you can learn the same material even if you're not in class. But on the other hand, that in-person education is so important, and making connections with teachers too.
That was Ilana and Ari Drake talking about their experiences with distance learning. Nora, there's one thing we haven't mentioned yet, the vaccine.
Well, New York City teachers are eligible to get the vaccine. That's not the case for teachers everywhere. With the federal government pushing to reopen schools, a lot of teachers still feel unsafe returning to their classrooms. There's an ongoing national debate as to whether or not vaccines should be a prerequisite for teachers to resume in-person instruction. The CDC director says it's not necessary for teachers to get vaccinated, but many teachers' unions across the country disagree. 10 weeks since distribution began, New York State's administered more than 3.5 million doses, but it'll be a while before the majority of the population has gotten the vaccine.
And that's why we're producing this series, to talk about all the ways we've learned to cope with this pandemic and how those ways are going to affect our lives going forward. So join us next week where we'll keep talking about education because it's such an important topic, and we're going to tackle the college admission standpoint. Special thanks to Ilana and Ari Drake and Emily Paddon for joining us today.
Thanks also to Sheila Maloney from Norwood News, Luis Rebolledo, and Michael Max Nobby, and everyone else at BronxNet, as well as George Bodarky and Robin Shannon at WFUV. To read, watch, and listen to more from Bronx Connections, go to norwoodnews.org, WFUV.org, or bronxnet.org. I'm Nora Thomas.
And I'm Eliot Schiaparelli. Thanks for watching.